Right, good afternoon everybody and welcome to this session at the Creating Communities Conference. This session is about heritage. Heritage, is it worth it? Well, I think generally we'd all sign up to the idea that heritage is great, it brings great economic benefits, it's great for communities. People on the whole don't want to see old buildings destroyed. But there's a real problem with that. Who actually pays? Of course, there are a number of possibilities. Ideally, we'd like to see the conversion of a historic building into something revenue producing, or at least sustainable, preferably by a trust or a charity, or even the private sector. But as we all know, conversion of historic buildings is expensive, even when times are good. So the result is that if it's too expensive to do something with it, heritage buildings can get demolished and replaced with nondescript, low-grade development. That deprives communities of their heritage, as well as decent places to live and work. So this session is going to explore whether we can actually fix that. We're going to look at the role of different agencies, public, private, charitable, in trying to address market failure and trying to bridge that value gap between what should happen and what is actually affordable. We'll look at it in the context of the government's levelling up aspirations. I'm always struck by my travels through the north about how many wonderful heritage buildings there are in our old sort of industrial towns in the north. But the more buildings there are, the more problem you have in actually solving that economic gap to keep them in productive use. We're going to look at the importance and inspiring role that the historic environment can play in enhancing value and community acceptability for big regeneration projects. People actually like to see a historic building at the centre of a regeneration project, rather than just a sea of glass and concrete, as indeed some of those sort of modern developments can turn out to be. We will, if we get time, look at the potential impact of the current planning reform agenda. And of course, we won't be able to avoid COVID. So I don't want this to turn into entirely a discussion about the impact of COVID on how we look after, maintain, refurb our heritage assets. There are plenty of other forums in which that's happening. Now, we're going to have four very different perspectives on this. The local community view is coming to us from Adala Leeson, who leads the socio-economic analysis and evaluation team at Historic England. And thank you very much to Adala for stepping in at the last minute. We were due to have somebody from Bolton Council, but unfortunately he had to drop out. We're then going to have the property developers perspective. Mark Latham, the director of Urban Splash, is going to talk about that. Then we will hear from the leader of a very well-known heritage project, Nicola Chance-Thompson, who is CEO of the Peace Hall in Halifax. And then finally, last but absolutely not least, we'll be hearing from Duncan Wilson, who is the Chief Executive of Historic England. Now, after some introductory remarks from each of them, I'm going to then pose them some further questions and we'll try and get a debate going. And I really would urge you, the audience, to join in through the question facility. And I'll try and incorporate as many of those as I can in the discussion. But first of all, to whet your appetite, you're going to see a very short video prepared for us by Historic England.
So I'll mute myself, yeah?
Right. I think that's come to quite an abrupt end, but I think since we were sort of rerunning certain of the screens, we could have been there all afternoon. On the other hand, you got a good look at some fabulous buildings, and I actually spent all my time trying to work out whether I knew where any of them were. But anyway, that sort of whetted your appetite for the sort of places that we're talking about, what we actually do with our heritage in some of these places where affordability, viability is a real problem. Right, I'm going to turn now to our speakers. So Adala first from Historic England. I think you're going to help us sort of focus a little bit on the benefit to communities from heritage. So over to you. You turn your mic on rather. Right, we're still not getting up.
Thank you. Hi.
It's all right. Right.
Apologies for that. I've got a very brief slideshow, but very few minutes to go through this. So heritage, is it worth it? From my perspective, and given my job title, of course, I would say heritage is absolutely worth it. And we evidence this in so many different ways in a production that we produce called Heritage Counts, which is an annual audit of the evidence around the socioeconomic and environmental evidence of heritage and the benefits of heritage. But in reality, from many other perspectives, the answer is heritage is not always worth it. And this is a problem. Given that I only have a few minutes, I'm just going to go through this very briefly. So up and down the country, there are reports of heritage at risk. These are vacant, underused sites that are real opportunity sites that are just going missed. From an economic perspective, this is really problematic because these places can provide us much needed homes, employment spaces, community and recreation spaces. Economics is a study of how we allocate limited resources. It's a constant balancing act. As consumers, we're weighing up how to spend our money. We also provide our goods and services through labour markets or enterprises. We also, governments spend their money and balance their taxation versus the expenditure. As far as heritage is concerned, we're always weighing the extent to which we invest in heritage, when and the frequency by which we do so. Or do we just demolish and start again? Heritage assets are goods and services that have public good characteristics. Heritage-based schemes deliver wider socio-economic benefits, and these benefits go beyond the investor and they are there for members of the public to enjoy. This is how market failures occur, and this is why there is a need for public sector intervention. This is why there is a need for public bodies such as Historic England. A stock of well-maintained historic buildings is a wellspring of benefits for society, ranging from attracting high-value workers to an area or strengthening a sense of place for local communities and much, much more, as evidenced in our heritage counts. In contrast, poorly maintained heritage stock underperforms for their localities, and they might be a drag on the economic and social regeneration of places. It is the uniqueness, the distinctiveness, and the connection to our past that heritage provides that generates those benefits for people, and it generates benefits above and beyond. Historic England have been investing in heritage assets and historic places for some time now. And here is an example of the Derby Partnership Scheme in Conservation, looking at the before and after. And this was a really good example of how our regeneration scheme led to a successful increase in footfall in the high street. We've just recently launched our historic high street heritage action zones, where we will be trying to do more of this really good work, and we'll be investing in 68 high streets up and down the country. Social and economic value. This is what
Adala, we lost you for a moment then. Can you recap by a sentence or two?
Yeah. Okay, I will start here. Is this where it was? Heritage?
Yeah.
So heritage has cultural, environmental, social, and economic value. it's this combination that makes heritage so unique, and it is in reality the definition of sustainability. But it's also this combination that makes it really difficult to capture the value of heritage, and it's also one of the reasons why we underinvest in heritage. From an investor's perspective, it's pivotal that we're better able to quantify and monetize the value of heritage, the value to people. We know we need to do this. This is why we, the heritage sector, are working with DCMS. And what we're trying to develop is something that builds on the same model that we use for natural capital, which is what we're going to be calling a culture and heritage capital account. If we don't do this, then the answer will often be no, it's not worth it. But if we are able to capture the values of heritage and better able to monetize those in economic models, financial models, then we will be able to provide this generation and future generations with the full benefits of heritage. And I'm going to finish with this quote here, which is from Robert Merton Solow, who is a Nobel laureate economist. And he says, over the long term, places with strong distinctive identities are more likely to prosper than places without them. Every place must identify its strongest, most distinctive features and develop them, or run the risk of being all things to all people and nothing special to any. And that is where the role of heritage comes in. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adala. Can I just pick up on one point you said, which I thought was really interesting? Yes, you can probably prove economic value because you can get numbers, you can look at footfall, you can look at enhancements in actual physical value of a building, and we can ask Marta about that in a moment. But I mean, this issue about a social value, a community value, which is so difficult to put a number on. Are you suggesting that we should sort of try and attribute numbers to that, or somehow that sort of gets tipped into the equation as an extra sort of balancing factor on the plus side, as it were?
Yeah, absolutely. What I'm saying is we need to systematically be better at capturing that economic models. And there are ways of using current economic methodologies to do that. So we're always looking towards the natural environmental side, environmental economics, because they've started really pushing the boat out. We also know that there is a lot of work being done around well-being and well-being research in New Zealand. They're developing a well-being budget, and that is the direction of travel that we really, really desperately need to go into right now, because it is the people who are at the center of heritage. Yeah. Heritage is our collective identity. It's our collective understanding of the past. So we really think that this is where we need to better be able to fit these into models. And there are ways, and they're not perfect. And we still have a lot of work to do, but at least we try and capture those elements of, and at the moment we're really missing a big part of the equation. So that's why I argue that yes, of course it is worth it, but if you're not capturing all the benefits, it's very difficult to weigh up the costs and benefits in a way that would come up beneficial to heritage.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's really encouraging. I mean, I hear rumours that the Treasury is even thinking of rewriting the Green Book to take account of social factors in a whole lot. I mean, not just heritage investment decisions, but broader investment decisions, which, has got to be right. Anyway, that sort of morphs very neatly into our next speaker, Mark Latham from Urban Splash. I mean, I've known Urban Splash for a long time, as indeed I'm sure a lot of our audience have. And you have done some fabulous projects around heritage, bringing heritage buildings back into life. Perhaps you could talk to us a little bit about why and how you found it worthwhile to do that, and I guess how you managed to make it stack up when so many other developers clearly can't.
Yeah, thanks, Liz, and hello everyone. I'm just going to try and share my screen, and if that doesn't work, then I'll just abandon it, but I'll just have a quick go because I've got a few pictures here that I hope might be of interest and just sort of illustrate the point of some of our projects over the years. So let me just have another go.
It doesn't look as if anything's happening at the moment.
No, okay. well, I'll abandon that. That's fine. And I'll encourage you all to visit our wonderful website, urbansplash.co.uk, to go and look at some of our past projects. But I suppose for those of you who aren't familiar with Urban Splash, we've really built our whole working life on the reuse and reinvention and sort of bringing back to life of historic buildings. Some of them listed, some of them not. But I think that's an interesting point, isn't it? That heritage goes well beyond what is officially designated as interesting or valuable or precious, because actually just shop fronts like those ones that Adala showed us there, or even just sort of small abandoned brick buildings, can be meaningful heritage to people in all sorts of environments. I mean, I think we started with working in the sort of industrial northern cities after the sort of recession of the 90s, property recession of the 90s, in a period when those kind of urban industrial landscapes were deeply undervalued and seen as scary and terrifying, and cities were generally bad, and northern cities were even worse, and inner northern cities were the worst of all and a no-go. And yet, you know, there were these magnificent relics of the past there, warehouses, factories, and so on. I mean, one I would pick out that I personally have worked on, amazing building in the centre of Bradford called Lister's Mill, built in the 1870s, a huge sort of landmark complex, and you can see it from all parts of the city. It's got a giant Italianate chimney, and it was described when it was built by the Times in 1873 as breathtaking as Versailles, and indeed it is and remains so. And yet it was just totally derelict, and that was because its economic raison d'etre had disappeared, and it was no longer. It was the biggest silk mill in the world for many years, and a part of the whole West Yorkshire sort of textile sort of complex of magnificent mill buildings. So you get these extraordinary buildings that are so large that they're simply priceless, unrepeatable assets. They would never exist in today's world. You couldn't build them economically at all. So that is one sort of very fundamental way that we can sort of value it and say, well, look, you're never going to get that again. You're never going to get Fort Dunlop in Birmingham. You're never going to get Park Hill in Sheffield, which some people love, some people don't. It's another project I've worked on for a huge amount of time, a modernist, brutalist housing estate. And these things have been produced by the particular circumstances of their time. And so I think that in itself is something that's very interesting. You can't do these things again. So that, you know, when they're gone, they're gone. So that in itself has a huge power. But I think the other thing that we love about historic buildings, and Adala touched on it, is that they're the pivot around which you can build stories, new stories about both the old, where this community or this place has come from, and where it's going to, and what often these places, historic buildings, are so deeply embedded in people's collective memory, in the individual family memories. You know, oh, my dad used to work in that dockyard. You know, or collectively they mean so much. And so that in itself for us is often the start of a conversation, given that we're very often involved in regeneration context. That's such a powerful thing, because often places which are facing massive difficulties, whether they're economic or social, beginning to rebuild positive stories about the past and into the future, I think is an incredibly powerful thing. And that, for me personally, is probably one of the most powerful things about heritage. And I know that sounds a bit intangible, but genuinely that has been one of the huge things that Urban Splash throughout our working practice have always used to our advantage, I think, as an underpinning for value growth, which you touched on, Liz. As you know, and as we all know, we all respond very warmly to historic buildings. So, But those are the positives. The negatives, or at least some of the practical, real challenges that the private sector developers and anybody involved, with third sector, sort of charitable, and we'll hear from Nikki in a moment. But with these specialist buildings comes some very specific challenges, which are probably well known to most of the audience who are listening. But specific construction cost risk is a huge challenge. You have with historic buildings, you have the specialist skills and treatments that are required to deal with these things. So whether that's masonry repairs or specialist, I don't know, hand glass painted restoration, or whatever it happens, there are a number of those specific skills that need to be brought in, usually into historic projects. But beyond that, I think from a very practical point of view, the key thing is the unknowns that are involved in historic buildings, and those are known unknowns, i.e. you can see that the brickwork or the stonework is going, because that's visible, and we've got to do something about that, and you can, to some extent, you can measure that. And then the unknown unknowns, the ones that are just lurking underneath, and you just literally, sometimes you can't safely assess that until you've part demolished or removed some of it, and you've already expended huge amounts of money before you. So those are some of the significant cost risks in construction terms. I'd also highlight holding liabilities. So if you're a private sector developer who owns an asset, a historic asset, you've got these very long-term significant holding risks and liabilities and costs. And if you own a historic asset, you've taken that on, usually willingly and knowingly, but it's not to be underestimated how big and difficult and additionally expensive that can be to just owning a normal piece of land. And then we come to viability, which I think happens in lots of different environments. It doesn't only affect sort of historic assets in areas of deprivation or difficulty, but when you put all those things together, those are obviously quite tricky. But I don't want to dwell on all the negatives, because, as I say, there are many reasons why we have always been drawn to historic assets. How do we make it stack? Well, I mean, the truth is that's very often because we are able to work closely with Historic England and other public funding partners who recognise fully the value of these assets, not just sort of to the immediate community, but to national communities. And that, frankly, is how we've often made it work. And very often the support of Historic England is a huge sort of lever for then enabling other funding sources to be brought to bear, whether those are public or grants, charitable trusts, or indeed private developer funding, which is what we specialise in. So if you get anchor funding from public partners, then you can then start to build confidence in the project. And I think it's not just money, though. It's undoubtedly sort of specialist knowledge, expertise, and support. And I mean, I think probably my time's up, but I just touch on the sort of flexible and very sort of creative way that I've found Historic England often support in their statutory consultee role as well. So the projects that I've worked on, a lot of them are, two of them Grade 2 star listed, and in Grade 1 listed in the case of the Royal William Yard in Plymouth. And Historic England, working closely with us, the local planning authorities in each of the different locations, have been incredibly thoughtful and willing to go beyond what you would expect in terms of, it's not just preservation, and people who say that that's one of the barriers. To me, that's not my experience. I've found that we can actually be very creative and go beyond what you might think is permissible in order to unlock an asset. So I'll stop there.
I think Duncan's going to pick up on that later as well, because I think that's I think that is very interesting. We ought to talk more about the role of Historic England working with developers. But I think you gave a wonderful sort of segue actually into what Nicola's going to cover. Nicola Chance-Thompson, who's the chief executive of the Peace Hall in Halifax. Well, you talked about, what was it, Lister Mill being as breathtaking as Versailles. I hadn't looked at a picture of the Peace Hall before until somebody showed it to me in preparation for this. And I think I'd have to say that's as breathtaking as St. Mark's Square in Venice. So Nicola, talk to us a bit about how you got to where you've got to today and some of the challenges along the way in turning something as huge into a viable asset.
Sure. I'm also going to try and fight technology and share a screen. So bear with me, Liz. Let's see if this works. Let me know if you can see it. Let's try application window. Ooh, is that working? Can you see anything?
No, I'm afraid not. I'm not sure you've got that facility, to be honest. I think only the organisers can put slides.
Oh, okay. Oh, because on my training I passed with flying colours.
Oh, right. No, well, I didn't.
Shame that it's not working on the day, but there we are.
Not to worry. People will have to sort of on a separate device look at the call while Nicola is talking, because I mean it sort of blows you away, really.
Absolutely. And if we're talking about priceless, unrepeatable assets, and I think we saw in Halifax has to be up there. But just in terms of heritage and is it worth it? Absolutely. And I guess people would say I would say that, but I've actually, due to some economic work that we carried out at the back end of last year, we demonstrated that the investment that the council and the Heritage Lottery Fund put into the Peace Hall back in 2014 has definitely paid off. I think my overarching concern is that heritage and culture are often seen as charities or charitable causes. And I think we need to recast that opinion. They need to be seen as a tool for recovery, regeneration, and social cohesion. And what we've seen with the Peace Hall is that it helps people reignite pride in their town, it enhances social fabric. And levelling up is not just the economic argument, but quality of life. And we've seen people's lives improve by investment in Calderdale. The council have been very ambitious, unapologetically so, and it's paid off. We've seen a big lift up in cultural and heritage tourism as a direct result of the investment that they made. And levelling up, another element to that is that infrastructure improvements can take a long time. I used to work on major projects for government in my past life, and we talk about projects in terms of 20, 25 years. And most people find that hard to buy into. You're asking people for a degree of altruism that sometimes they don't feel that they can give because of the disturbance or disruption or the cost that those things may cause to them. And what we've found with the Peace Hall and other historic regeneration projects is that you can actually achieve a big economic impact and quickly. And certainly in these very worrying times that we're in now, I think that people are going to be looking for some quick fixes, some quick recovery that we can have a look at. And I think that one of the arguments with government that we need to be putting forward is, as well as building the new, which is important, look at managing what you've got. We've got some great examples of where heritage has helped renew a town and where the history and the heritage of something can actually be used as the currency of the future. So a bit about the Peace Hall, because I never miss a chance to talk about this glorious place that I've got the privilege of looking after. It dates from 1779 and was really built as a cloth hall for trading pieces of cloth. So it's piece, P-I-E-C-E, as opposed to peace, which often gets confused by people when they're coming along to it. And in 2014, Calderdale Council with the National Lottery Heritage Fund invested 22 million in the building to transform the space into a world-class destination. And the money was really spent on the courtyard and in what were the traders' rooms so that they could be converted into shops, bars, restaurants and offices, really, for people to use. And this monumental Grade 1 listed structure is the only surviving intact Georgian cloth hall in the world. This is our very own Eiffel Tower. And we need to get more people to understand that it's here and importantly to come and visit it. We reopened the doors to the public in 2017 and 23,000 people turned up on the day just to come and see the newly transformed Peace Hall. And since we've been open to date, prior to lockdown, we'd reached 7 million visitors in the space of 3 years, which were the highest numbers of visitors that the Peace Hall's ever received. We work on a basis of looking at trade, heritage and culture. These are our kind of 3 things that guide what we do because they make sense in connecting the past to the present. We have 43 independent traders operating out the original traders' rooms, bars, restaurants, shops, cafes, creative businesses. It's a real hub. We've been referred to as the independent shopping mecca of the North by the Yorkshire Post. We have a thriving, not just a surviving tenant community here. We have a gallery, we have an exhibition. The stories of Georgian Halifax are told in state-of-the-art heritage spaces, and we have wonderful guided tours held by my very well-informed volunteers who often correct me when I get historical facts incorrect. So they school me on the history of the Peace Hall. We've delivered over 451 events and activities, a third of which are free. Last year we had Elbow play here. Next year, God willing, we'll have Nile Rodgers and Chic playing in the courtyard here. And again, all of those kind of big shows, Antiques Roadshow, have really kind of elevated the profile of the building and also, again, made people very proud of their town, very proud of their Peace Hall. And then a bit about the economic impact. The challenges with the Peace Hall were really that this was an unknown in many ways, in terms of it's never been used like this ever before. And we're lots of different things. We're an event space, a historical building, a really important trading community. And so there was no blueprint for this really that we could kind of take and adopt. But we've made it work, and our deficits were really our operating losses, which, if you like, could be treated as startup capital. In other words, if we hadn't have made those losses, we wouldn't have been able to propel the Peace Hall in the way in which we have, which has created the economic impact that it has for Calderdale. It was the regeneration tool for Halifax, and in a piece of work that we conducted with Bradshaw, Chamberlain Walker at the back end of last year, ex-Treasury experts who helped write the Green Book, who we're now convincing to rip up and start again, particularly with levelling up and the power switch to the north. They told me that the results were extraordinary in terms of Treasury terms. And what do we mean by that? We contributed £26 million to the local economy in just under 2 years. For every £1 spent on the Peace Hall, we generate at least £5.30 for the local economy. Just as a guide, good would have been considered £2. £5.30 is extraordinary in Treasury terms. So it's a great return on investment. And keeping the Peace Hall free to enter, that was another thing I probably missed. This is a free to enter building, which is a rare thing. And we would like to continue that as long as we can so that it is accessible to as many people as possible. It costs Calderdale residents the equivalent of 1 cup of coffee per year. And 90% of residents within our report, we looked at feeling as well as economic uplift. And 90% of the residents that we spoke to think the Peace Hall is important not only for Halifax's economy, but also for its reputation. And so we feel that the Peace Hall is a tremendous example of where heritage, if operated wisely, can really, really benefit regions and towns and boroughs. And I believe can play an important role in helping us to recover from the situation that we find ourselves in right now.
Nicola, thank you very much indeed. And I'm sorry people haven't been able to sort of look at pictures of the Peace Hall because it really does look fabulous. I think you made a really important point there. It's worth just sort of re-emphasising that. You had your capital costs and then you had your sort of start-up operating costs to get it going. Once you park those, you are now a viable economic entity. I mean, quite apart from the fact that you're bringing a massive local economic benefit, you are able to wash your own face by the sound of things.
We're reaching break-even sooner than we thought. I think it's fair to say that most cultural historic assets probably run at some form of deficit. But that's really how we should look at them. We should be looking at them at the return that they're bringing to community.
I mean, that's what I was sort of trying to get at, but that sort of, even if you wash your own face, that dwarfs compared with the what are you actually bringing to the local economy and community, which of course doesn't come directly to you, but it's a massive local benefit.
And I think that it's the other type of benefits too. For example, we had the University of Leeds open a business school next door. That wouldn't have happened without the Peace Hall generation. We've got Covéa, Lloyds, very big employers who have decided to stay planted in Calderdale and in fact expanding to Calderdale as a result of the Peace Hall effect, because we're actually creating a great place for people to live and work and want to stay, not just to commute, but to actually live in. And I think Adala talked about at the beginning, it's like, how do we get smarter at capturing some of this so that we can demonstrate our real value that makes sense to the taxpayer and investment decisions?
Okay, brilliant. Right, thank you very much indeed for that. And now, last but not least, we turn to the person who's probably best placed to take this broad strategic view of how we preserve our heritage, Duncan Wilson, CEO of Historic England. How do you believe we can best tackle market failure?
Well, there seems to be a rather disappointing measure of agreement breaking out, and I know that may not make the liveliest session, but we do all seem to agree, certainly about the diagnosis of the problem, which is translating these amazing social benefits into a system that eventually comes back to the market, which has to make the right decisions about investment. So, I mean, I think we all agree on that, at least, if not on precisely how to do it. Anyway, well, heritage is everywhere. It's part of our everyday lives, but it's often underappreciated until it's actually under threat, and then it's often too late. So I think we need to anticipate more. It's fragile. Once it's gone, the benefits it can deliver for not just our generation, but future generations are lost. And it can be very small things that, I mean, we took the Peace Hall is at one extreme, perhaps a drier version of St. Mark's, but nonetheless on that scale. St. Mark's Square, that is. But it's also about lampposts and cobbles and everything that creates an environment, and that has a value too. So Historic England's role is to champion and protect our heritage by whatever means we can. And that involves telling the untold story, working through the planning system, listing buildings, scheduling monuments, and providing financial incentives. And of course, training and just inspiration. Because unless we have more developers like Mark, whatever we do will not be effective. All that to unlock the hidden benefit. But we can't take it for granted that everyone thinks and feels that way. We need to prove it, and for that we need data, which is where Adala's fantastic work comes in. At a macro level, we can demonstrate the strong connection between a well-maintained historic environment and economic growth. Particularly in the creative industries, the cultural sector and tourism. For example, heritage employs more people at 464,000 and generates a larger direct GVA at 14 billion per annum than each of the security, defence and aerospace industries. But it doesn't make the same noise and it doesn't trumpet its virtues so much. And perhaps partly because it's more disparate, which is also a strength because it involves lots of small local groups as well as big industries. Heritage can be a major factor in achieving our carbon reduction targets. And again, that argument hasn't been clearly enough stated or often enough. By reusing buildings rather than demolishing and rebuilding, we avoid releasing all the carbon tied up in those buildings and burning more carbon to create the new materials and the new buildings. And I think that argument is one we need to make more clearly. Refurbishing just 25% of those buildings and improving their energy efficiency would save more than 15.5 million tonnes of carbon, the equivalent of planting nearly 4 million new trees. And we, Historic England, need to be more flexible about how old buildings can be upgraded to improve their environmental performance. And we're certainly very much alive to that. So heritage can be a really important contributor to building back better and greener. But there's more to the argument than economic data and carbon targets. Heritage gives character to places which people identify with. gives us a sense of belonging and being part of a great sweep of history, if it is allowed to. Heritage really matters to communities. 93% of people agree that local heritage raises their quality of life, and I think that's become even more obvious during lockdown. And 80% thinks it makes their area a better place to live in. And this is true not just in our big urban centres, but also in our smaller towns and the countryside. Too often, those historic town centres have become places associated with failure and decay, a vicious circle which depresses property values and makes refurbishment more risky as a prospect for developers. We can get that right by addressing the market failure in the first place, which brings me back to where I started from. But the picture is very different in different parts of the country.
We're nearly out of time, Duncan, so if I can just ask you to speed up a bit so that I can just get a quick word in from everybody else before we finish.
Okay. Well, I was going to point up the divide between areas where the market will easily cope with heritage buildings in whatever state, and the areas where it absolutely won't. And that's a big issue for levelling up. And that's why we need to address that market failure. And I was going to mention our Heritage Action Zone and High Streets programmes, which are beginning to address that, but are, a small start given the scale of the problem. And then, of course, mention finally the Planning White Paper, which is really important. It's a great opportunity for us to join all of this up in an overall system of heritage protection, which allows for sensitive adaptation, but keeps the best of what we've got. That's probably more or less what I needed to say.
Yeah, I'm sorry to have hastened you. I'm getting rude messages.
I paid the price for being last.
We have to move on because we've only got a few minutes left. I think, sadly, because so many interesting things have come up in the course of those 4 initial presentations, we don't have any time for a real debate. So I'm just going to throw it back very quickly, sort of 30-second answers to each of our panel. If you could sort of wave a magic wand, what sort of one thing would you like to see change so that we can have more of the really good projects? Less failures, less demolition, less just not being able to use something that's old and potentially beautiful. What sort of one thing would you like to have your wish, your genie, when your genie arrives? Who'd like to go first? Mark's smiling. Have you got a one thing you could give us? What would you do?
Yeah, well, I was thinking rather selfishly, which is probably wrong, and so I don't. But this would help us, I think, at a practical level. Is perhaps a sort of almost a credit rating, sort of, or a rating to simplify application processes and so on, and to build trust between operators and developers who prove themselves to be responsible, and then you could perhaps have a sort of a simplified process, but a very practical sort of logistical point, really.
And of course, Urban Splash would have a very high credit rating under that scheme.
Well,
naturally.
As I say, it's slightly self-interested.
Of course you would. Who'd like to dive in quickly next? Who's got an answer to that? Adala, could you do it? Could you give us one?
Yeah, I think one of my problems that we're increasingly realising with our research is this issue about buildings and carbon in buildings. And I think one of our biggest problems is that our current systems and our way of measuring isn't the correct way of measuring. We are missing huge swathes of embodied carbon that is in existing buildings, and we just don't count it. That is the one thing I would really like us to do, is count embodied carbon, focus on refurbishing, recycling, reusing what's already here, as well as our kind of new development.
Right, that's a great point. Yeah, Nikki, do you have a one big wish?
I think one big wish would be ensuring that we can preserve all of the specialist skills that we need to keep these buildings beautiful and to restore them. My concern at the moment is that with perhaps capital projects stopping, will we see some casualties? So how we can perhaps help those specialisms to do different types of work. So I think it's an appreciation and support of those really key specialisms would be my one big wish.
Brilliant. Okay, and Duncan, one final point for you. We may just get cut off suddenly. I'm not quite sure.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to inspire the big house builders and more small builders, of whom there are far too few, to appreciate the values of refurbishment and creating new homes out of old buildings, because I think it's a very bipolar industry. We've got fantastic developers like Mark working with what we've got, and then lots of the biggest companies just building new on greenfield sites. And actually, I don't think that helps. And government needs to get involved in that too.
That's brilliant. Actually, that's 4 really great ideas. If you can just sort of pull out, sort of things that we really want to see happen. I hope the organisers are listening to sort of think a bit about those 4. We are now officially timed out. We don't appear to have quite been cut off, which is very useful. So I'll just take the last 30 seconds to thank you all very much indeed. I'm sorry about the problems with the pictures, and indeed that the video seemed to sort of keep repeating itself. But we started on what would have been a great debate. Message to the organisers: we need 2 hours next time to cover a subject like this. So thank you all very much indeed, and goodbye.
Bye.
Thanks, Liz. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Mark. Nice to see you. Bye.
Thank you.